Good morning. How are we this morning? Good deal. We're going to start a new series here in just a minute entitled Flawed, and I'm going to dig into it. I did want to just take a second to let you know what Kyle was talking about. Last week we did what we called a family message for owners here at Owners Invest. The reason we call our members owners is because owners invest. Again, those pledge cards in front of you. Just pray, see what God wants you to do. We're not taking names. Just see what God wants you to do. We saw people last week put things in like, I'm going to start a budget. I'm going to give a one-time gift. I'm going to increase my giving by a percentage, by a number, whatever it may be. That is encouraging. It's also helpful, and it's where we need to be as a church. So the chest is open. You can drop some. People did in first service. Drop them in there. You don't have to put money in there. If you want to drop $1 million, that's cool. We'll take it. But anyway, other than that, you're fine. Just keep giving the way you're supposed to, and we'll move forward. I'm going to jump into this series. That Run to the Father song for me has so much inside of it because it's something I need to remember. I need to remember that when the world gets crazy, when everything's crazy around me, that's the place to run to the Father. This series is called Flawed, Heroes of the Faith. If I ask the question, how many of you have flaws in here this morning? You can slip your hand up, you can put it back down, you can be a liar, your neighbor can punch you and say it, but the recognition is we all have flaws. The flaws of the people that are in the Bible are huge. There are liars, there are murderers, there are people that committed adultery and sexual immorality and disobedience and all the different flaws that are in the Bible. And yet God used the faith of flawed people to grow us and to teach us where we can be in our faith with God. There's going to be kind of an overall theme throughout this entire series. And as always, remember, if you want to go to our website, you can scan that QR code in the chairs in front of you. Go to sermon notes, you can follow along, or you can look up on the screen. If you have a Bible, you can follow along that way, but I'm going to put everything up on the screen this morning so that you can follow along. So here is the theme that we're going to use kind of throughout this series. You'll see it coming up. It is this: no matter what our past contains, no matter, remember, there are murderers and adulterers and sexually immoral and disobedient and all the things that can possibly be from one end of the gamut to the other are people that are listed in the Bible. So, no matter what our past contains, God still has a purpose for us. Matter of fact, I want you to do something with me. Everybody take a very deep breath. Hold it. Release it. If you were capable of doing that, then you have breath in your lungs and God has a purpose for your life. It still is there. And God can turn all the flaws, all the difficulties, all the things that you're walking through in your life, God can turn all the flaws into faith stories if we just allow Him to do it. Today, we're going to start with a story of somebody we're probably familiar with, or you've at least heard his name before. We're going to talk about Abraham. Everybody say Abraham. Before God gave him the promise, his name was Abram. God changed his name to Abraham. You might hear me say Abe this morning. You're going to hear all three of those names coming across, so it's all the same guy. Abe, Abraham, and Abram. It's all the same guy. So you'll hear me kind of talking about him. There is a chapter in the Bible. It's Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is known as the Hall of Faith in the Bible. Y'all know what a Hall of Fame is, right? There's a Hall of Fame for football, for baseball, for rock and roll, amen. Everybody's got a Hall of Fame. Well, the Bible has a chapter that many people have deemed as the Hall of Faith. These are people that were listed mostly in the Old Testament that their faith was not fulfilled. In other words, they didn't make it to the time of Jesus. They died before then. But Hebrews lists them as people who had faith in their life. But every single one of them had flaws. Every single one of them. And by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but it encourages me to know that some of the greatest people in the Bible were just as screwed up as I am. That's encouraging, isn't it? Just a little bit. They made the book, so that's pretty cool. And yet they were flawed individuals. Hebrews 11 starts off these words. It says this. It says, now faith is confidence. Faith is confidence in what we hope for. This, what we hope for, is what faith is. It's what we hope for and for the assurance about what we do not see. You cannot see faith. You cannot pour a glass of faith and have a sip of it. You can't see faith. But this faith is something that we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And then it's very interesting. In Hebrews 11:2, it says this. It says, this is what the ancients were commended for. This is what the people of old were commended for. So, we're going to start with this guy named Abraham, or Abe, or Abram, however I'm going to say that. And you'll notice in Hebrews 11, if you've ever read that chapter, I encourage you to, because we're going to use several characters out of that chapter over this series. So you can read ahead and then go back and see about their stories, and we're going to be walking through those. But every one of the verses that talk about these people will start with words like this: by faith, Abraham; by faith, Sarah; by faith, David, or Samson, or Rahab, or different ones. And we're going to do character studies of men and of women that were by faith throughout this series, and you're going to see as we walk through this. So let's start with this one, by Abraham, all right? In verse 8, it says this: by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Now, how many of you remember Abraham when you were a kid? I grew up in a church where we had Sunday school for kids, we had vacation Bible school. We learned incredibly spiritual songs like this one. Father Abraham had many sons. Sing with me. And many sons had... Y'all remember this? Or Abraham, and I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise the Lord. Right arm. And then you would start moving, and just incredibly sanctified songs we would sing when we were children. And I would do all the motions, but I'd have a vertigo and fall over and die. So we don't know how to do that, all right? So certain things you learn about. So this guy, Abraham, we've known about him. We read stories about him. And it's interesting because the Bible tells us that Abraham was a guy who heard from God. But there's a backstory to Abraham. See, something that we don't think about, and maybe you don't think about when it comes to Abraham, something Joshua points out. Let me read you some words that Joshua wrote. Joshua wrote these words. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, the mother, lived beyond the Euphrates River, and they worshipped other gods." So if you were here through our last sermon series about the Bible, you remember that we talked about the Jewish faith as it was beginning to develop. There were other religions around the world, and these other religions would, most of the time, they would make idols, and they would make gods that they would worship, and these gods didn't talk back to them, but they worshiped all kinds of things. Abraham, being on this side of Euphrates, probably was somebody who worshiped the sun and the moon and the stars. He probably had family idols, and he worshiped his ancestors in these different things. So Abraham was not always a follower of God. So if you see the picture, Abraham is worshiping other gods, all kinds of other gods, as Joshua refers to. And then one day, night, we don't know exactly when, God speaks to Abraham, the God that we know, speaks to him. Now, Abraham's lived his entire life, and he's had all these idols and all these gods and all these things that he's worshiped. And this time, one of them talks to him, one that he's never heard from. And you know what that God says to do? Get up and go somewhere that you've never been before. Now, can we be straight up? If all of a sudden, while sitting here, you hear a voice from heaven go, "Get up, take all your stuff, and move to Chicago." How many of y'all are in? I said Montana first service, and everybody raised their hands. So I'm going with Chicago this time, all right? High crime, smelly place. Anyway, all right, I'm going with Chicago, all right? So how many of you, if God said, get up and go to Chicago, you'd go right now? Don't over-spiritualize this and go, whatever God tells me to do, I'm going to do it. Nope, you would sit there and go, Chicago, really? Come on, God. But that's what happened to Abraham. Abraham, in the middle of living his just regular old life, God said, go. And Abraham is considered the father of the Jewish nation. He's the father of faith. He's the character that's talked about in the Hall of Faith, the very first one. He's mentioned numerous times throughout Hebrews 11, throughout all of the Bible. The new Gentile church refers to Abraham. The Jews refer to Abraham. He's the father of everything, and God says, go. Now, this is cool. When God told him to go, and I don't know what the voice was like. I don't know if it was Morgan Freeman or what the voice was that he heard. But this is what happened. In Genesis chapter 12, it's recorded this way. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. Now, I love this. I actually had them underlined for me. When God said, I want you to go, he also gave a promise. He said, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. So Abram went as the Lord had told him. God told him 5 times, I will be with you. I will be with you. I will be with you. Now that sounds like a pretty cool invitation. When a voice that you've never heard before, that you recognize to be a God or the God, says to you, I want you to do something, and then he says, I'll be with you, that'll make your faith a little bit strong, won't it? Won't it? That's pretty cool. I wish God would speak to me that way. I wish God would sit down and go, I need you to do this. I don't know why I gave him a vampire voice, but anyway. But he doesn't. He did with Abraham. What an incredible faith. A God he'd never heard from spoke to him, and he said, I'll follow. Now, over the many years of Abraham or Abe's life, we see these incredible faith moments, but we start to see some flaws. We start to see that no matter what you've done in your past, God still has a purpose for you. No matter what mistakes you've made, no matter what flaws you have, God will use you. Matter of fact, there's 4 occasions that are actually talked about in the Bible about some flaws that Abraham had, or 4 occasions where his flaws kind of came to the front. And I'm going to ask you to really, really pay attention. Maybe take some notes. I've seen people before take pictures of what's up on the screen. You're welcome to do that, or just go to the website. I just want you to get where we're going to talk this morning. Because the first time that we see Abraham stepping into this country that God told him to go into, something hits him just like it hits us. See, a lot of us, maybe not you, but I grew up, or maybe you did too. You grew up in a church where they said you should follow God no matter what. Did y'all grow up that way? Follow God no matter what. And then you got lured, like somebody putting bait in front of you, lured into this false belief that if God tells you to do something, everything is going to be great in your life. In other words, you're sitting back going, God, I just need you to open this door. And God opens that door and you're like, heck yeah, God's opening the door. I'm going to walk through it. And the first step you take, you step into quicksand. Been there? By the way, I'm of a generation that I thought by now I would have fallen into quicksand at some point in my life. The way that every TV show had quicksand on it. But anyway, it doesn't, I don't know. Anyway, so that's what it feels like following God. We go through a door and we've been fooled into thinking. So was Abraham. Now, Abraham specifically heard God say, I will be with you. And yet, his first step into this new land, we see something. Bible scholars will agree that every single time that we see Abraham following God, Abraham will hear from God. God will say, I want you to do this, and then Abraham will follow. There are several occasions that Abraham takes matters into his own hands, that God doesn't tell him. The first thing that happens when he steps into this land is something that happens into your life and something that happens in my life. It's a one word. This is the word. You ready? Disappointment. Disappointment. Have you ever been disappointed after you took a step to follow God? Can we see you nod? Let me see if you're with me, all right? God, I'm going to follow you. And then it feels like God disappoints you. And God lets you down. For Abraham, or Abe, or Abram, he steps into this land, and look what happens. It's actually recorded in verse 10 of Genesis chapter 12. Now, there was a famine in the land. Now, I understand that you guys are sitting here, it's 11:36, you're praying that I don't go past 12 because it's Father's Day, and that means somebody's going to cook for you, dads, and you're so excited, or somebody's going to take you out to eat. Some of you are sitting here, and you're going to make really dumb statements like, I wish she'd hurry because I'm starving. You ever said I'm starving before? You're not. You're not. The majority of us have plenty of access and extra. We're not starving, okay? But in Abraham's day, when there was a famine in the land, it typically meant there was a drought. The cattle were dying. The vegetables weren't coming in. Nothing was producing. And a famine, people were dying left and right. Now, Abraham, when he hears from God and God says, I will go with you, he's doing the right thing. But the first step he took into this land, a famine hits. And what happened to Abraham? And this is where you're going to see you throughout this story. Or maybe it's not you. Maybe I just wrote this entire message for Tony. I don't think so. I think it's for you as well. But this is what happens so often. Disappointment turns to fear. See, when disappointment shows up in our life and we say, but God, I thought I was following you. I thought I was going with you. I thought you were taking me into this land. But Abram, just like probably what we would do, took matters into his own hand. He didn't say, God, what do you want me to do? Abram said, they have food and they have cattle and they have vegetables down in Egypt, so let's just go to Egypt. We don't see anywhere that God or that Abraham ever asked God. So we're assuming and putting into this that Abram makes the decision on his own and he says, I've got to do something. And that disappointment turns into fear in our lives. So often when it feels like we're following God or we hear from God and the steps don't go the way we think they should, fear begins to enter. Now I want to show you something. You're going to follow along with this. Are you ready? Disappointment turns to fear. And watch this. Fear brings a choice. Every single time that fear comes into your life, there is a choice that you have to make. I've done a bunch of study and a bunch of preparation for things that God has in front of me. And part of reading it is reading psychology and the way that the mind works and the way things work. And they say that in difficult situations, when fear enters into our life, we either have a flight mechanism, which means we run or we get away, or we have a freeze mechanism, which means we hold still, or we have a fight. So you have flight, freeze, or fight mechanisms that go inside of us. Little known fact that I want to help you with, I shared in the first service, and I just feel like this is important. This may be your takeaway from this morning. I was reading something the other day, and they say that if you ever get bitten by an alligator, the best thing you should do is you should freeze. Okay? Do y'all feel like that's going to help you out throughout the next few weeks of your life? I feel like at some point I should just offer you something practical, all right? It's actually true. They say that if I don't know who wrote this study, like I had one bite me and I stood still and it worked. So the idea is this. An alligator, they want you to fight. Alligators eat live things, not dead things. So what an alligator wants is they want to take you to that death roll, to the bottom of the pond or the bottom of the lake or wherever they're taking you. And they want you to fight so that they can spin you and kill you and then stick you under a log and eat you later on. Yay, what a graphic picture I just gave you this morning. So if you're ever bitten by an alligator, you should fake being dead. You should freeze. And then the alligator, they say, will release you. So, I don't know why I shared that with you, but I just wanted you to know that, all right? So, typically a human being, when fear enters into our life, we make one of three choices. We either fight, or we flight, or we freeze, one or the other. When fear entered into Abraham's life, when fear enters into your life, when you're saying, God, I want to follow you, I want to do the thing, you are faced with a choice. And here's the choice that Abraham had. I can either trust God or I'll control the situation. Now, I am pretty confident that was only Abraham. That has never happened to you or I, right? Or is this something that you don't say amen, you say, oh me, to in the middle of this? See, fear brings a choice. As Abraham was stepping into this fearful place, we see some of these flaws and some of these fears begin to come out. Matter of fact, when he steps into Egypt, he's already found disappointment in God and fears come in. And now as this fear comes, he goes into this land of Egypt. And you may not know this about Egyptians, but Egyptians in that time, Egyptians can kill foreigners who have something that they want. And in Abraham's particular case, he was married to something that a lot of men wanted, a very pretty wife. It's recorded this way. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, who will later be Sarah, I know what a beautiful woman you are. By the way, for all the men that are married in the room, you should tell your wife that she's beautiful. Not when you're about to lie to her or lie to someone else about her. You should tell your wife she's beautiful several times a day. Can I get an amen on that? A lot of men that I've met, a lot of you that end up in my office for marriage counseling, it's because you went, well, I told her she was pretty on the day I married her, and I just figured that would take care of it. No. We're going to line you up and smack. Anyway, all right, we'll move forward, all right? Abraham said, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. So I want you to do this. I want you to say to them, you're my sister, so that I'll be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. That fear that hit Abraham left him with an opportunity. He had a choice. Will I choose to trust God? He's already taken a step away from God by going to Egypt. But now he's saying, God, I'm really scared. They could kill me. So at this point in time, Abraham has lost the promised land that God gave him, the place that God's going to make an inheritance, the land of Canaan. And now he's losing his wife because of all the men in Egypt that wanted to take Abraham's wife. Pharaoh wanted Abraham's wife. Because Abraham said, I'm scared, I'm not going to trust, I'm going to control the situation. The flaws begin to pile up. We know that disappointment will come into our lives. We know that disappointment turns to fear. We know that fear always brings a choice. You're either going to trust or you're going to control. Something's going to sit in that situation. Now, if you know the stories of Abraham, you know that God delivered him from that God came to Pharaoh in a dream and said, release her. And Pharaoh was scared and he released. So God brought Abraham and Sarah back together and nothing happened. But what's happening in Abraham's life is something that we see in our own lives. And it's this. Fear brings a choice. Am I going to trust or am I going to control? What are you going to do? And here's the crazy thing. Oh gosh, you got to get this. The choices that you're making. Matter of fact, let me say it this way. They'll put it on the screen for me. Our choices create patterns in our lives. If you, when fear and disappointment comes into your life, if you immediately go, I'm going to trust God, I'm going to stick with Him, I'm going to see what He's going to do, that will create a pattern. It will begin to show you, oh, I'm going to go here and trust God, so the next time it happens, I'm going to trust God. The opposite is true as well. If every time fear and disappointment comes into your life, every time something in your life comes that you're not expecting, if you begin to say, oh my goodness, I've got to control this situation, patterns begin to develop in your life. You are creating those patterns. Your mind is working that direction. You're beginning to see this pattern, this pattern, this pattern, and this pattern. How many of y'all have ever recognized patterns in your life? I am hanging out with some people right now who are really good at pointing out the patterns in my life that are not good. I married one of them 33 years ago, and sometimes she ticks me off when she tells me I'm not thinking correctly. But man, she's pretty and I love her. So I hang out and I learn and I walk through. But our choices create patterns in our lives. Let me prove it to you. In Genesis chapter 16, remember, God told Abram, he hasn't changed his name to Abraham yet. God told Abram, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. Move. Disappointment comes. Disappointment turns to fear. Fear brings a choice. Am I going to trust or am I going to control? After that, the choices begin to create patterns. So I want to give you just a little bit of Bible right here, okay, all right? The name Abram. Do you know what the name Abraham means? Or Abram? The name Abram means exalted father. Now, if you are named exalted father, you would think you had some children. God told Abraham and reiterated multiple times, out of you I'm going to create a nation. Out of you, I'm going to create a nation that's going to one day bless the entire world. But Abram has made it all the way to about 100 years old, and he still doesn't have any children. 100? I don't know if y'all know this. It's old, all right? Very rarely do we celebrate nurseries in retirement homes. We just don't do those two together. That's next week's sermon when I talk about Sarah. But anyway, all right? Your name's Exalted Father. Well, then God reiterates the promise to Abram, and he changes his name to Abraham. Isn't that cool? Do you know what Abraham means? Father of multitudes. Still no kids. And what does Abram do? What does old Abe do? He follows the same pattern. When God doesn't come through, when fear exists, I'm going to take control. We see it played out. Look at this in Genesis 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abraham agreed to what Sarai said, and Hagar conceived and had a child. This is a side note. This is absolutely free. I want to share this with you, okay? When we don't follow God, there are ramifications that last forever. If you're watching the world news today, I was having a conversation earlier with a couple of ladies. If you're watching the world news today and you see the battle between Israel and Hamas, y'all seen that, right? You see in the war, Hamas attacked Israel, Israel's retaliating, all the things, people are losing their freaking minds, everything's going crazy, all this stuff is happening. Okay, Hamas represents the Islamic nation. Israel represents the seed of Abraham and the Jewish nation. Abraham's choice to take control and sleep with Hagar produced Ishmael, the father of the Islamic nation. The battles that are being fought in 2024 are because of Abraham saying, I can't trust God. Little side note of history there. Your patterns are going to continue to follow. Matter of fact, let me share this with you. As your choices begin to create patterns, your patterns begin to repeat themselves over and over and over again. And if you've got a group of people around you or somebody with you that says, oh, there's a pattern, and they begin to help you walk through that, that's great. But if you're trying to walk through this on your own, you begin to see the patterns begin to repeat themselves over and over in your life. Abraham actually goes back and does that very first thing when disappointment hit. We see in Genesis 20, now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar. And there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, she is my sister. I feel like this is Act 2 of the same play we just saw. Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and he took her just like Pharaoh had done. You begin to see in Abraham's life these patterns repeat themselves. And I would bet everything that I am that in your life, when you try to take control, patterns begin to be created. Patterns begin to unfold. Let me see if I can show you this really quickly on the screen, and they'll put these up there for me. Are you ready? Disappointment leads to fear. Fear leads to a choice. Choices create patterns. Patterns repeat themselves. How many of y'all can identify with those 4 statements? You don't have to put your hands up. You can say, oh, me inside. You can just sit there and go, good or bad. By the way, when you make right choices, those patterns begin to repeat themselves as well. And there is something that I think God showed me this week while I was studying and putting the final everything together with this message, is the fact that Abraham just continued to repeat this every single time God would come into a way, and Abraham would begin to say, I'm disappointed, God's not showing up, fear comes. These patterns would happen, and it made me look at me, and then it made me look at some of y'all, or just know your stories, or just see the human race as we are sitting here, and I wonder if this is true. I wonder if God continually allows us to go through what seems like the same thing because He wants us to learn something before He allows us to move past it. Oh, snap. What if that's what God's doing? What if where you're sitting this morning, you see the things of your past? No, you're not doing that anymore, but you see the patterns. You see the choices. You see the fears. You see the disappointments. You see the pattern repeating itself. And if you just took a second, you would see that every single one of those situations are tied together. No, it may not be the same faces. It may not be the same places. But every single one of these situations, it's almost as if God is bringing you to the brink and saying, are you going to trust me now? Are you going to trust me now? It's almost like God's the Verizon man saying, can you hear me now? But instead, He's God saying, are you going to trust me now? And then you go back to the same pattern. And you're wondering, why am I sitting here facing the same battle that I faced how many ever years ago? It's because God keeps bringing you right to the verge and saying, here it is again. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? You know what's cool about this flawed hero of the faith in Abe? He figured it out. You want to know how I know? Because the Bible tells me so. See, there comes a time when Abraham and Sarah, they do conceive. 100 years old. Sarah's 90 years old and she has a baby. She has the child of the promise. His name is Isaac. Now, I several months ago used this story in a message of Abraham taking Isaac to sacrifice him because God brings Abraham right to that place again. You are the father of multitudes. That is the son of the promise. Now go sacrifice him. Can you not imagine that brought disappointment? Can you not imagine that brought fear in his life? Here comes that pattern one more time. Abraham has a choice. Am I going to trust or am I going to take control? What am I going to do? This is how I know Abraham figured it out. Because this time, and by the way, if you study this correctly, many of us were told in VBS or Sunday school that Abraham takes his little boy Isaac up to sacrifice him. The reality is Isaac was probably somewhere in his late teens to early 20s, might even been as old as 30 when Abraham takes him up on a hill and says, and ties him and puts him on an altar. This time, Abraham made up his mind. Abraham made up his mind that God is putting me in a place that he says, you have to trust me. Your name is Father of Multitudes. And this is the child of the promise that the multitudes are going to come out of. But I need you to sacrifice him. And Abraham had a choice once again. Do you know how I know Abraham made the right choice? Because he followed through. And at the very moment, look at this, in Genesis 22, verse 2, God said, take your son, your only son, the son of the promise, whom you love, Isaac, go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. This wasn't God going, just go up there and go, I trust you, God. This was God saying, I want you to kill your son. And Abraham said, I have spent too much of my life in this pattern. And I won't anymore. See, Abraham was flawed, but faithful. This is what Abraham learned over the years. I'm going to help you out. And some of you are going to love seeing these up there. And some of you are going to go, oh crap, here I am. All right? This is how Abraham went from flawed, still flawed, but faithful. Are you ready? They're going to put them up on the screen for me. This is what he did. Abraham began to do this. He began to expect trials. Did y'all know that your life is still got a lot of mess ups sitting in front of you? Did y'all know that? Did y'all know there's a high probability that whoever you like running for whatever office you want them running for come November may not win, and you're going to think your life's going to fall apart even further? Did you know that there's a possibility that your income may change, that your children may turn out to be rats? All the things that you're hoping for may not turn out the right way. Did y'all know that? What if you begin to say, hey God, I understand. Like Hebrews 11 says, Abraham looked for a land that he could not see. What if you begin to recognize on this earth, there's going to be trials. So I'm going to develop the pattern so that when the trials come, watch this. The second thing Abraham did. He began to recognize his patterns. What happens if you begin to say, I'm going to expect trials are coming. I'm going to recognize my patterns. Now, if you don't know what your patterns are, let me do something really, really quick. How many of y'all in the room are married? How many of you in the room are married? Put your hand up really, really high. Just be proud. Say, I'm married. God gave you somebody who recognizes your patterns. Ask them. Don't ask them with, oh God, they're going to tear me apart. Ask them with a sincere, humble heart and say, I want to be the wife or the husband that God wants me to be, and I want to learn and I want to be better. Ask them. They are the very best person that God has put in your life to help you and to show you. Now, for the rest of us, the rest of you that aren't married or have other people, or some of you, you need to find somebody. If you're a guy, find another guy or a group of guys. If you're a woman, find another woman or a group of women to be around and ask them this question: what are the patterns that you see in my life? And then I pray to God there's somebody honest enough to say, let me tell you what your pattern is. You suck. That's what your pattern is. And they just continue to walk with you through that and show you how to walk through those patterns in life. Abraham figured it out. Expect trials. Recognize your patterns. And then I love this. Because he was expecting trials, because he was recognizing the patterns in his life, he prepared in advance. And he said, I'll bet you God's not done with me yet. I bet you he's not done. I bet you there's going to be more. And I would imagine that in the situation that God said to Abraham, go sacrifice your son, do you think maybe there was some disappointment and some fear that entered him? I think Abraham had gotten enough wisdom to where he went, I recognize that feeling. I recognize that fear. I recognize what I have done in the past. But this time, I'm going to trust. And because he trusted, God provided himself a sacrifice. And God let this name go on. And we're going to talk about Isaac in the weeks to come. And we're going to see how this goes through. But I want to bring you back to what I started with this morning. And here it is. No matter what our past contains, no matter what your past contains, God still has a purpose for you. Learn. Take to heart the things that we're trying to teach in our church. Get into a life group with other people. Get together with other people who have the ability and the responsibility to pour in your life. If you go, man, I'm just in a season of life where another night of the week I just can't work out, then find a place to serve on Sundays. These people will begin to be family with you. We had 50, 60 some people who serve in our church every single week, and they all gathered together at a 10:10 meeting on this morning at 10:10, and somebody shared about the hurts and the pattern or the things in her life, and she said, this is my why. I'm at this church because a community of people got around me and they helped me through the hard difficulties of my life. That's what we're here for. No matter what is in our past, no matter what our past contains, God still has a purpose. Now I'm going to share something with you and I'm going to be done. All of these heroes that we're going to talk about, these heroes of faith that are flawed, I need you to recognize this. I need you to see it. If you're watching online, if you're sitting in here this morning, I said it in first service. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to remind every single one of us. Abraham is not our hero. Moses is not our hero. Isaac is not our hero. David is not our hero. Rahab is not our hero. Sarah is not our hero. Samson is not our hero. Balak is not. None of these guys in the Bible. There is not a hero in the Bible except for one. The hero of the Bible is Jesus. And so often, I want you to learn from Abraham. I want you to learn from Sarah. I want you to learn from the flawed but faithful people that we're going to talk about in the weeks to come. But if you are not wrapped up with the faith of Jesus, and if he is not the one that you're trying to mimic and follow, yeah, we can learn from the flaws, but the person that we want to follow the most is Jesus himself. That's who we want to follow. And I love this. The writer of Hebrews, we don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. There are some assumptions and people have argued it for years, but nobody directly says they authored the book of Hebrews. So we don't know, but I know this. The writer of Hebrews, after he listed all of these verses about the heroes of faith, the guys and ladies who walked throughout time that brought about the coming of the Messiah, every single one of these, he starts, they didn't have chapters and verses, he just finished a statement and he said this about where we need to focus. And it hit me during first service when Sierra, and she did it again in second service, when she stood up and she began to lead us into the song, Run to the Father. It didn't hit me until then. See, 30 years ago, my dad went on to be with Jesus. And I miss him. Father's Day, I hate Father's Day. I love my kids. I love my grandkids. They're amazing and perfect. And I love them and they're fantastic. But I don't like Father's Day. There's some other people in the room that I've talked to this morning. Father's Day's hard for some of us. I'm glad to get the shirts and my kids love me and that's fantastic, but I'd like to see my daddy and I don't get to. Well, it dawned on me this morning when Sierra was talking about some of us having different pictures of fathers, and I get it. Listen, my heart hurts for a lot of you that never had a good father on this earth. I had a good one. He just left too early in my timing. But some of you, when you think about a father, it hurts even worse. But something hit me in first service when Sierra was sharing. I knew where I was going to go with this message this morning. These verses where I'm going to finish up. These are the verses that I read at my dad's funeral 30 years ago. And it never clicked until this morning when I heard Sierra share that. See, this guy who wrote Hebrews, and he talks about faith, and he talks about these guys that we would consider heroes. He reminds us of something. The author of Hebrews writes it this way. He says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great a cloud of witnesses. Now, I want you to understand something. I'm going to take just a second and kind of break apart this verse, okay? Great a cloud of witnesses doesn't mean that the people that have died before you are sitting in heaven watching you right now. They are not leaning over the edge of heaven going, I wonder what Susie's doing. I wonder what he's doing. No, I pray to God there's more exciting things to do in heaven than to look over the edge and see what we dummies are doing on this earth. What it means is they've gone before us. And it gives a picture, a word picture in the Greek language of a Colosseum that is cheering at the top of their lungs. Go, go, keep your faith, keep going. And I love that the writer of Hebrews says, since all of these ancients and all of these people have gone before, since there is a great cloud of people that have gone before us, then here's what we need to do. We need to throw off everything that hinders us. How much is encompassed in everything? Everything. Now I love that the writer separates everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us. And I love that he wrote it this way, because what that means is not everything in my life is sin, but some of the things in my life can be keeping me from God. It could be things that you're worshiping instead of God. It could be things that you think are a higher priority than God and His church. I don't know what they are, but I know what the author says. He says, since all of these ancients are there cheering us, then we have the responsibility and the obligation to continue this moving forward, and we've got to set it aside. And then he tells us where to look. And I love it. The author doesn't say, I want you to go back and look at Abraham. I want you to go back and look at Sarah. I want you to go back and look at David and Isaac and Moses. He doesn't say that. He says this. He says, let us run with perseverance. By the way, the word perseverance means patience on repeat. We all stink at being patient. Let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us. You have a race, and your race is different than my race. You have an assignment that I don't have. You have a responsibility that I don't have, and I have one that you don't have. And I'm going to run the race that God has set before me to the best of my ability, because there's people cheering me on because God gave it and He put it in front of me. And I pray you do that as well. And then look where He tells us to look. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. On who? And then He gives one of the coolest illustrations in the entire Bible. I love how it translates in the English language. He says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. See, the story of a pioneer is this. I think about it in the Old West, in the United States, when our nation was being born, and on the East Coast when the colonies were happening, these guys and these women said, we're going to venture out west, and we're going to colonize, and we're going to free the rest of America, and we're going to create states, and we're going to do these things. Happen as they were heading toward the Mississippi River, there would be caravans of wagons, and when the rain and the snows and the muds would all fill up, these guys would begin to make wheel tracks with their wagons. They would begin to create these wheel tracks, and they would create ruts that were in the road, and you knew that if you could get in that rut, you could move forward. You could move through that wheel track in front of you. And what the writer of Hebrews is saying is Jesus has already gone before us. He has created the wheel track for us to follow in behind Him. So if you're looking for a hero in the Bible, if you're looking for someone who says, this is how faith is encompassed, you trust your Father above everything else, you do not put things in your own control, in your own way, and you follow the wheel tracks that were set before you by Jesus. That's the pioneer of my faith. And then he says, not only is He the pioneer, He perfected faith. He never had a flaw. If you're looking for a hero, it's not a ball player. It's not somebody in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's not even Abraham. Oh, we learned from Abraham. He's not my hero. The guy who pioneered it and perfected it. The one who said, I'm giving my life for you. That's the one I'm going to follow. How about you? What do you do with today's message? You find out what your patterns are. You say, I have a habit of trying to control things instead of trusting. You say, oh, I can name the disappointments and the fears, and I see how those disappointments and fears leave me with a choice. I see how my choice creates patterns, and I can see how the patterns repeat themselves, and somewhere along the way it's got to stop, because I think God keeps bringing me to this same point, wanting me to learn, and I go, duh, and I go backwards again. And it's time to learn. This is where you look. And you look with people around you. Get connected with other people. We are an attached, connected church. And we want you to be a part of what God is doing here. Talk to me. Stop at that Next Steps desk in the back. Somebody will be back there. Say, I've got to take some next steps. I've got to step forward. I need help in my walk. And we'll walk with you. Let me pray. God, I love you this morning. Thank you for your word. Thank you for, God, what you're teaching me, what you're teaching our church. And I pray that we remain faithful and that we look at you. You are the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. May we focus completely on you and trust you in all that we do. Thank you that the guys that we think, the ladies that we think had it all together, they're just as messed up as we are. Thank you, Jesus. In your name we pray.